White House, Education Secretary Miguel Cardona is probably going to expand on this idea to provide another venue to aid college kids and their debt. John Yoo, the former Deputy Assistant Attorney General, UC Berkeley Law professor, also served as a law clerk with Justice Thomas, knows of what he speaks. John, if you can explain to me, it just seems like another legal bounce here to go from hanging on a HEROES Act to hanging on something else, a student debt relief program that wasn't geared or meant for this. It could meet the same fate. I'm not saying all the way up to the Supreme Court, but legally dicey.
Neil, it will meet with the same fate as the case today. You have to ask President Biden and his administration, if you've got a good law that allows you to cancel student debt, why'd you waste everybody's time for the last year and not rely on the law in the first place? And the reason why is because, as the court made clear, and I just want to say, the court is reminding us of very simple truths. Yesterday, you and I said that yesterday was the Constitution is colorblind. Today, the simple truth is Congress has the power of the purse. The president doesn't have any constitutional power to spend money unless Congress authorizes it. You notice in President Biden's comments just now, he never addressed the constitutional issue. He was making a pitch as if he was asking Congress to pass his debt program. He never mentioned that the Supreme Court doesn't take a position on whether a debt payment program is good or bad. All they're there to say is it's Congress's job to decide whether to spend $400 billion in student debt relief. So I think if the Biden administration just tries it again with a new statute, the court will come back and say again, we see no clear law that gives the president that kind of spending authority, and you can't stretch and twist the existing laws to try to get there.
Now, John Roberts was joined by Justices Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. I think that makes up the total 6. That the president had gone a step too far and a legal level too far. Speaking for the conservative majority, John Roberts said that the secretary asserts that the HEROES Act grants him this authority to cancel, as you were pointing out, John, this $430 billion in student loan debt. We hold, he says today, that the act allows the secretary to waive or modify existing statutory, or regulatory provisions applicable to financial assistance programs under the Education Act, not to rewrite that statute from the ground up. Isn't what the president is thinking here rewriting a statute within a program that doesn't call for it?
Neil, you're getting really good at reading Supreme Court opinions, because that is the exact phrase that's going to come back and haunt the Biden administration when they try debt cancellation version 2.0. Because the court is saying, we see nothing in any law that authorizes the cancellation of student debt. The only thing we see is a law passed in 2003, as you pointed out, that says you can modify, waive. And the whole point of that law was really, I was around in the government at that time, was if you got called up for service, you wouldn't have to, and got sent to Afghanistan or Iraq, you wouldn't have to be paying your student debt until you came back. But that statute doesn't say you can just eliminate the debt entirely. It just means you can suspend the payments, which is very sensible, bipartisan, passed by large majorities. So the Supreme Court essentially said, there's nothing in any of the laws we've seen that says you can cancel $400 billion, anything that important, economically and socially important. We're going to say, go back to Congress and get a clear statement that you can do that.
Let me step back, and the president's reaction to this, he wasn't happy. I don't know if he wasn't happy as much as he was of the affirmative action decision yesterday, where he had referred to the court as not a normal court, I think I quote him correctly. Didn't say anything like that on this decision, just that he disagreed strongly with it. But this gets to be a common response and refrain from the White House these days on this, obviously conservative court's series of decisions, 3 of which in the past week went against him. What do you think of how he reacts? This is maybe more, I want to get your view as a lawyer, and knowing the system as you do. We do have 3 branches of government. We have to accept what each and the other does, sometimes not happily. But to say, as he did yesterday, that it's not a normal court, what do you think?
Yeah, I've got this new book out this week called The Politically Incorrect Guide to the Supreme Court. And this is a great pitch for it, because what we do is we trace the history of attacks on the Supreme Court. In the last 2 years, you have seen these unprecedented assaults on the institutional independence of the Supreme Court by progressives who are angry with decisions like Dobbs from last year about abortion, or gun rights from last year in Bruin, or now this year's case about affirmative action and now student loans. You've seen progressives propose trying to pack the court, add more members to the court, trying to cut back on the kind of cases the court's allowed to decide. Now you're having proposals for investigations of justices, trying to make it easier to get them to recuse from cases. We haven't seen this kind of attack on the independence of the courts since it decided Brown versus Board, and these kinds of attacks were launched by Southern segregationists, or since the New Deal, when FDR tried these attacks on the court that wanted to stand up for contract and property rights. And so I predict after these losses, these last 2 years, you're going to see enhanced attacks on the court by progressives.
So to circle back to this, and waiting, there's going to be a White House briefing that will include the Education Secretary Miguel Cardona, maybe expanding a little bit on what the White House plans to implement this idea of postponing or forgiving some student loan debt. Don't know where that's going to go. But what was at issue here is the role of a president. He can propose, he can delay repayment, he can freeze payments, and not just by himself, but for, acts of war, or you're going off to war, I think, as you said, for the serviceman who's heading off to Afghanistan, what have you. But he can't start cutting it, right?
That's right. And I think there's a difference how we should understand presidential power. Presidents have great power in waging war, conducting foreign policy. But when it comes to spending money, domestic programs, it's Congress's job.
Got it, my friend. John, thank you very much.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.